Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a big show. We will be breaking down the upset from last night between Florida State and Boston College, as Florida State is served their second loss in just technically 1 week of football. We'll talk about that. We'll also get to the AP Top 25 that dropped at around 2 o'clock today. Talk about where everybody falls on there, if I agree or disagree with their list. Also today, we are doing our official NFL playoff predictions. That is for both the AFC and the NFC. We'll get a little bit of a Super Bowl prediction in there as well. And then, of course, the big news coming out of football, Trent Williams, just about 20 minutes ago, signed his contract. We talked a lot about Trent Williams in the last couple of weeks, saying how important he was to this 49ers team for them to be successful. He came back to practice. Now he has a deal. We'll talk about all of that and more throughout our entire show. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we're going to start off our show today with the big upset in college football from last night as Florida State falls to Boston College, their record down to 0-2. A team that started as the number 10 team in the nation now has just a 1% chance to make the new 12-team college football playoff. They lose 28-13 in blowout fashion, a game where Boston College really just controlled the entire time. When we talked about Florida State last week, their game against Georgia Tech out there in Ireland, we talked about how they got killed in the run game, destroyed on both sides of the line, offensive line, defensive line, and the same exact thing happened again. Florida State got killed in the run game. We'll start with that. Boston College, 270 rushing yards. That is insane. That is not a normal amount of rushing yards. You're not supposed to just be able to show up to somebody else's house and rush it down their throats for 270 yards. And it came from everywhere. Their quarterback, which really has been the Achilles heel for this Florida State defense, is that rushing quarterback position. Two running backs. They ran for a combined 270 yards, and that is unacceptable for a team that's supposed to have a really good run defense. Again, it starts at the front. Then, offensively, you let DJ Uiagalelei get under immense pressure, and he is a guy that, as we've seen, struggles under pressure. He threw one of the ugliest interceptions I have ever seen, missed a whole bunch of wide open receivers, and practically sealed the game with a near pick six on a time that it just didn't really make sense. And we'll get to that in a second. But the big takeaway from this game is Florida State is all but eliminated. Who would have guessed that just after week one, Florida State is 0-2. Florida State is out of the race for the playoffs. That is not something people expected. I know, me personally, I thought Florida State, after missing out on the playoffs last year, they did lose a bunch of pieces, but they reloaded in the transfer portal. That's what they did last year to get to that 13-0. They had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that would push them forward, but instead, they come in as the biggest disappointment of the season so far. And I know there's a lot more season, and technically if they run the table, I still think there's a way for them to get in, especially in the ACC. They have a couple more big games left. Now, they lose one more game, they're out. A lot of people are saying that they're already out of the playoff hunt. And I'd say, yeah, probably. Like we said, the ESPN prediction model says that they only have a 1% chance to make the playoffs. That's not a good shot. I'm not giving them a lot of confidence to make the playoffs, but they run the table. They have to get through teams like Clemson. They have to get through Miami, who looked really, really good last week. They have to get through Notre Dame, who Miami and Notre Dame arguably looked like the two best teams outside of Georgia in week one. If they beat those three teams and they run their schedule. They're going up against Memphis in their next game. That's a team that a lot of people are predicting to be that group of 5 representative. That's a lot of that's a lot of big games. Now, that's a big if for them to run the schedule. And I don't think for them to run the gauntlet, I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're basically out. But for people saying they're already eliminated, they've got about half a leg to stand on right now. The ACC could still cannibalize itself. There is a path for them to get in. As far as an at-large bid, they're out on that. But technically, even though they're 0-2 in the ACC, there's still a shot. But getting back to the game here, Boston College comes out, and they have Bill O'Brien as a head coach, first-year head coach with Boston College, former head coach of the Texans down there in Houston. He leads this team in a very NFL-style way, and we saw that especially at the end. They didn't run up the score. They didn't take up their starters. They took a knee, lost a bunch of yards, taking the total rushing down to 263. But again, they dominated up front. They had 270 rushing yards. Ridiculous. Outside of that, their defense played just amazing football. In the first quarter, Florida State finished with 4 total yards. Now, a lot of that has to do with them only holding the ball for 50 seconds in that quarter. And again, that gives a lot of credit to the offense. They knew what they were doing. They wanted to get Florida State into a bind. That time of possession is a huge, huge deal. They end up finishing the game with so much more time of possession than Florida State, 40 minutes to 20 minutes. They held the ball basically 2/3 of the entire game. It was a masterclass for them defensively. They really showed up on the scene and said, hey, we're here this season. We are ready to show the ACC we're a threat. Now, Boston College, for as much good as they did, there was a lot of bad on the Florida State side. And again, I talked about how the coaching just wasn't there for Florida State when they were over in Ireland. There's a lot of the same takeaways. Now, instead of using their timeouts too late in this one, they used their timeouts too early. Also, on that interception that I talked about, they were coming out of halftime. It was 14-6. They started with the ball. It's 4th and 6 at about the 50-yard line, right? It's a one-possession game. 13 minutes left in the third quarter. You're not in desperation mode. You don't need to go for it in that situation. You punt, usually, in that situation. But instead, Mike Norvell says we're going to go for it. And we're having a much different discussion about this play if it goes any other way than really what was the momentum shifter. Once this play went off, it felt like Florida State was done because DJU held on to the ball for way too long, took too long to get through his reads, pressure got to him, and he just chucked a ball up to a triangle of Boston College defenders. Boston College picks it off, takes it all the way down to about the 7-yard line, and then they punch it in 1 or 2 plays later. That is, for all intensive purposes, a 14-point swing right there. You know, the defense had just come off a bunch of good stops. The offense had just led a huge drive down the field before halftime, one where they definitely should have scored a touchdown. DJ Uyunglele was leading a masterclass of a drive until they got to the red zone, where he missed not two, but 3 pretty open guys. One of them was wide open, not a defender in sight. Just a bad throw. It got to the point where Florida State was chanting for the backup quarterback to come in once Boston College scored a touchdown. That's not the spot you want to be. Mike Norvell is absolutely on the hot seat. It feels like there's a chance he won't even survive the whole season. Now, he got in a lot of people's good graces in Florida State by going 13-0 last year with that Jordan Travis-led team. But before that, when he was taking over for Jimbo Fisher, it wasn't really a really successful run. You go back and look at the past teams at Florida State that have started 0-2. Mike Norvell, in his 5-year, 6-year, 7-year tenure, has had 3 or 4 of those teams. He has not had a very successful run at Florida State, a team that prides itself on its football program, right? This is a team that has a very good football history, and yet look at where they are now. They came up with all these expectations, and now they're just the third team in the modern era to start off 0-2 as a top 10 opponent, losing to two non-ranked opponents. Because of that, they fall out of the top 25, and it's going to be really hard for them to get back in. It was just an abysmal performance on all ends. They need to play with more effort, with more energy, and it needs to come from the coaching staff. It came up on the broadcast a lot, but there isn't one guy on this team that seems to be taking a leadership role, that seems to be taking, hey, guys, we need to get in gear. We can't be losing this game. A player like that, right? They don't seem to have that kind of player leadership, and they need to find that if they have any chance. Again, they're all but dead in the water right now. They need to run the table. They need to get a bunch of things to fall their way. But if they can flip the switch right now, they might still have a chance. I'm not too optimistic about them. They got blown out by Boston College, and I think this is a bigger referendum on Florida State than it is Boston College, Georgia Tech, who Georgia Tech slides into the top 25. Again, we'll break down the entirety of that top 25 later on. But let me know your thoughts on this game. I think it's just really disappointing how Florida State has come out so flat this season. We'll see if they can rebound, at least make it a respectable season, try and make a bowl game. That should be their goal now. But we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to start our NFL season predictions. We're going to start off in the NFC, go through all 7 playoff teams, a little bit of some playoff matchups, and, of course, we're going to predict which team is going to come out of the NFC. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.